You're the person I want to talk to today, KJ. Thank you for joining me.
Pleasure to be with you.
So, Donald Trump has decided to have an ideological war on all sectors in America and also abroad. So, not only is he going after the intelligence officials who lied about the Hunter Biden laptop, not only is he going after the people who tried to prosecute him, not only is he going after all of these federal workers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of these sectors of the political spectrum and ideological spectrum, he's in a war with. He's in a war with the blob. But on top of that, he's also decided to expand that externally to other countries. So Canada, Mexico, China, South Africa, he's going after South Africa. And apparently the European Union is also on the list to take a knuckle sandwich from Donald Trump. To show like the level of disrespect that he has to Europe and Canada is mind-blowing. But again, they've allowed themselves to be into that spot. So he's treating them in the spot in the way he sees them. From your take on this, China has effectively said, I believe he's putting 25% saying tariffs on everything coming out of Mexico and Canada. But China, I believe it's 10%, but correct me if I'm wrong. China's response to this, or all of their responses actually, is we will retaliate. But China has added something else on top of the retaliation being a lawsuit saying we will take you to court over this. Now, Trump is using emergency sanction power in order to pull these sanctions off. There's some provision that the president has at their disposal where they can say it's an emergency. Yeah, they can say it's an emergency, and as it's an emergency, we can now do the stuff that under normal circumstances we would have to get either through Congress or at the very least we would have to have all of these other processes come into play, like hearings, public opinion, all this other stuff. By going through the emergency process, you can avoid doing all of that and just pass the tariffs directly from the office of the presidency. This happened once before, correct me if I'm wrong, when Trump got in the first time around and he tried to do this kind of sanction war against China. China reciprocated their sanctions targeting the farmers in various Republican states. If I remember this correctly, I vaguely remember this. But this happened once before in regards to this kind of trade war that Trump kicked off the first time around with China. At this point, it's not just China. Now it's the world that he's effectively doing this with. What is China's response to this? I know they said reciprocal sanctions. What are those sanctions going to be? Do we know? And what is the lawsuit that they're talking about filing?
So they're going to be filing a suit with the WTO. You know, the WTO, if you're a member of the WTO, you're committed to fair trade. You're not allowed to levy unfair sanctions. They're going to take it to the WTO. And China has done this type of thing before. The US is actually the country that has the most suits against it in the WTO. This is not going to go anywhere because the US has essentially disabled the appellate court of the WTO. So they will not be able to render a judgment. And even if they did, it would take years. So this is simply China stating that we are unhappy with you. We are going to take legal measures, but actually it's not going to amount to much. And I think they're holding their cards very close to the chest. I think they have a lot of quivers in the arrow, pardon, the multiple metaphors, but there are many things they could do. They could simply move tit for tat, right? It's not hard for China to increase tariffs, as you pointed out, like they did before. They could actually withhold certain categories of export. For example, rare earth minerals or critical minerals, of which there are, several score, 60 or so, that would immediately impact the United States. They have a lot of levers to pull, but my feeling is they're just going to sit back and just watch this for a while because they're watching the chaos that Trump is bringing to his own government. And I think their theory is we're not going to get in the way of this. We're not going to give him something to push or lean against. And how ironic is it that the U.S. is going after Mexico and above all Canada, right? I mean, you should have heard Krista Friedland, talking about Canada, the other day. I mean, everybody has their hair on fire. But it all
Hmm.
boils down to the Kissinger dictum, right? It is dangerous to be America's enemy, and it is deadly to be America's friend.
Yeah, this seems so pointless to me. Now, I think, and this was something that I've been having a conversation with people about prior, but this idea of spheres of influence. Marco Rubio gave a speech recently where I forget who he was talking to. It wasn't Macon Kelly. I forget who he was talking to, but he pointed out basically, the unipolar moment was a fluke. That's not something that there should have been any kind of real expectation for the U.S. to manage. This kind of Fukuyamas of the world. The end of history. Okay, well, that was a fluke. That was a unipolar moment. It wasn't necessarily the end of all things, and we're getting back to this standard spheres of influence. And so, from Donald Trump's point of view, he looks at Russia, China being power centers. He may or may not look at Iran as being a power center. He does not look at Europe as being that way at all. I mean, from his point of view, Canada can be walked over. Panama can be walked over. Greenland, Denmark, these countries can effectively be walked over. They can't necessarily do anything. So he doesn't necessarily seem to give them this kind of basic, bare minimum level of respect that he would give, let's say, to a major power, in the way that he seemed to look at Russia or the way he looks at China. It's very wild in the way that he's looking at this. But it sounds like he's just getting back to this idea of he's changing the way the world works. And trade or tariffs seems to be his way of effectively doing that. I mean, China may be sitting back and watching this, but I mean, let me ask you this. Are they going to has there been any talk about counter responses in regards to counter tariffs in the way that they responded last time? Because last time they tailored those tariffs specifically to like the soybean manufacturers to go after Trump's base itself. It's like, okay, where are the areas that Donald Trump won in the election? Okay, we're going to target it to hit those areas so those people can effectively blame Trump for any kind of damage that they're taking on their farms. Have there been any conversation about this at all, or are they really in a wait and see mode? Because nobody else is in a wait and see mode. Canada is not in wait and see. Mexico is not in wait and see. And Europe has already said that they will be reciprocal if Donald Trump goes through with passing those tariffs. What are your thoughts?
Well, make no mistake, China has issued very, very strong words against the United States. They believe that, this, is very, very destructive of the relationship, and they're reminding the United States that they want a good relationship, and a good relationship is in the interests of all. But, going back to the first Trump tariffs, you have to understand that those original Trump tariffs, the Trump trade war, came in two stages, and they only got to the first stage. But the second stage was really a demand on China to change its governance, to change its economy, to get rid of state-owned enterprises, which are actually 80% of the economy. There's no way China would have gone for that. So China simply just, kind of threw them a few bones and then, dragged its feet and played them out, just played the game out. But it really was on the mindset of the United States. It was a demand to change the Chinese system. The Chinese wouldn't go for that. But what's interesting this time round is, of course, you have the tariffs which are being levied. Note that there are less tariffs being levied on China, 10%, as opposed to a U.S. ally like
I noticed that.
Canada, 25%. As I said, their heads are exploding. But what it boils down to is, I think, if you look at what Marco Rubio said, there's some very, very interesting things that he said. He essentially said the unipolar moment is over. We're in a multipolar world now. Those are words that you would have never, ever heard from the neocon Biden administration. Those words would have been stripped from your mouth. You would have been flailed alive if you had said those words. And in a sense, it's a kind of a opposite. It's a chiastic echo of what Karl Rove said when the neocon project started. He said that we are an empire now. We are an empire now, and we create our own reality, and the rest of you can study it, but you just might as well get along with it. So from saying we are an empire now to saying we are no longer an empire. The unipolar moment is over. We're in a multipolar world now. That is kind of an extraordinary admission.
It
And I
is.
think, that signals that there has been a sea change both in the thinking of the Trump administration and the world that we inhabit. The other thing that we have to note is not simply the tariff war against allies, which is sending the message that there is no such thing as allies. We're simply looking out for ourselves. This is the realist world in which we inhabit. It's a world of power politics. Countries may have their regions of influence, but you, because you are not powerful enough, and because you are sucking up to us as a vassal, that doesn't mean you get a place at the table. It means that you are going to be on the table. And there's a kind of poetic justice to that, because they were thinking that by begging begging for the master's scraps, that they would also get to dismember and attack China. And now, that has been turned against them. And so there's some strange irony there. The third piece that we want to note, not simply that we're in a multipolar world or that we are going to tariff our allies, but the US is currently in the process of dismantling, according to their statements, they're in the process of dismantling USAID, right? And these are the tools of empire. This is how the empire interfered in other countries and twisted them to its will. And so in a sense, they're, kind of burning their tools, they're getting rid of them. And it's kind of extraordinary because I think it signals, this kind of turn towards neomercantilism, which I had predicted, because Trump at the core is a neo-mercantilist. He believes in high tariff barriers and, cultivating domestic industry and looking at balance of payments, etc. This classical neo-mercantilism. And then the other thing, which I think is really fascinating, is he's dismantling the DEI regime. Now, this is really interesting because when the neocons took power, when the neoliberals took power, essentially they had to throw people who were oppressed a bone. And the red herring that they gave them was DEI. The real issue is class oppression. The real issue is economics. But instead, they were thrown the bone of culture and DEI. And it was a way to kind of distract them from the class oppression and the class exploitation and the very, very real economic suffering, and to kind of do a misdirection towards cultural issues. And it was very effective. It made people riled up, and it really did create, a sense of divide and conquer, although, essentially those people would have all been allies if they'd really seen the issue correctly. So it created divide and conquer. And now what's interesting is that this regime has it smoked its own dope. It's gotten high on its own supply, and it believes that this DEI red herring, which is simply a smokescreen, they believe that really was this kind of Marxist conspiracy, right? It's not. It was the kind of replacement for a class analysis. But they took it into their hearts, and they believed, they smoked, they drank the Kool-Aid and believed their own lies. And now they see that DEI itself was the issue. So now they're going to go against it and dismantle it. Now, what they don't understand is that you really need that constant culture clash, just like you need constant wars, because you want to distract people. And if you dismantle it completely, as it looks like they're taking serious steps to do that, then essentially you've gotten rid of this, smoke screen, and now you're going to be seen in your naked glory for the imperial exploiters that you are. So this is very, very foolish, but it's a very interesting thing that they're doing, and they're undermining themselves 50 ways to Sunday. Same thing with tariffs. I could say more about that, but tariffs is just more of the same kind of undermining.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm glad, and it follows suit with this whole thing of, well, Democrats do this all the time. It's like, instead of dealing with the material realities that people are effectively dealing with, I'm going to put a black person or a gay person or a woman or a whatever into a position. And it's going to make people feel better about voting for that person because they're voting for somebody who looks like them. It's not whether or not the person is going to do anything materially different that is going to benefit that group in some fashion. It's more so, it's kind of like 60s politics. It's like, oh, Richard Nixon is putting in a woman in this position. It shows how progressive he is. It's like, okay, dude, we're in 2025, right? And you guys are still doing something very similar. And I'm glad that you put it in those terms, because we make the same argument when we're pushing back against it. It's like, you're sending people into classes. You are sending people into these kind of things where they can talk about the fact that some people are racist, or that some people are black, or that some people are whatever identity that the people want to ascribe to. It in no way changes the material circumstances on the ground. Meaning, it doesn't make me richer by you having this conversation with me, or by having a meeting every few hours where you have bringing people into a room to have this kind of conversations about identities and races. Again, it doesn't do anything to my bottom line. It doesn't increase my minimum wage. It doesn't ensure that I have a job that is going to last. It doesn't do any of that stuff. It is purely virtue signaling. But they don't see it. And so I also agree with you. I would point out racist people will be racist, and they tend to be ideologically driven in the way they look at that stuff. And so, no, they didn't look at it through this lens of, okay, Democrats are doing this purely because they don't want to deal with the real material realities that people are effectively dealing with. They want to effectively use identity in lieu of actual material circumstances. But they didn't look at it that way. They just looked at it as, these black people are unqualified. These women are unqualified. And if we just had a good white man doing that job, everything would be great. It's like, okay, but that's also just as much nonsense. I mean, Malik calls those people the woke right. And I think he's right. I think both are missing the boat on this stuff. And yeah, he has decided to go full bore with this kind of reshaping of the American experience, whatever that means. It's fascinating. It legit is fascinating. I mean, even the thing for the orthodoxy stuff in regards to war and peace. You're right. Donald Trump had no issue using U.S. aid to try to overthrow Venezuela. None. Zero. And even now, when he's going after South Africa, okay, again, if you're playing this role where DEI, or I'm sorry, U.S. aid and these kind of tools that the CIA uses in a clandestine way to overthrow governments, if you're going to play that role, play that role. You can't do this pick and choose stuff of, well, we don't like that government, so we're okay with using it for that. But in other situations, we don't necessarily want to use it because they tried to take me out of office using some of the same mechanisms, or the same people who uses the U.S. aid to get other governments out of the way were also the same people who were trying to get me. So I feel some kind of way about it, and I want to get rid of it. Again, that's interesting. I've never seen anything like it. And you know what's wild about this too? I've never seen a situation where they've lingered on this idea that America overthrow governments. Usually that is kind of like a quiet secret. It's the thing that people know, but you don't necessarily linger on. You don't really talk about it. Tulsi Gabbard, when she was given her hearing, and Tulsi Gabbard was asked, effectively saying, hey, my concerns about you is that you say things that are similar to Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin, or sometimes even Bashar al-Assad when he was in Syria. And as Gabbard pointed out, we are overthrowing governments. We are backing terrorists. People who I fought when I was sent to Iraq, those are the people who we are effectively backing, and not just backing, putting in positions of authority and power. That is disgusting. It is amazing that you're okay with us doing that. Their issue wasn't that we were doing it. Their issue was that Tulsi Gabbard says something about it. And so it's like, it's very bizarre in the way that this operates now that they've decided we're going to focus on USAID, and we're going to out the fact that USAID was instrumental in overthrowing the Ukrainian government, that it's been trying to overthrow the Slovakian government. They've been putting pressure on the Georgian government. That is astonishing. I've never seen anything like that. I've never seen anything like it.
It is absolutely astonishing. And, once again, if we think of the first Trump cabinet or the first Trump presidency, I mean, this was one of the things that he was known for, was his refreshing candor. Call it, what
Yeah.
you will. I mean, judge it how you will. But there was an incredible candor. He would talk about, South Korea and say, those military exercises are really expensive, and they are, and they're really provocative. And this
Yeah.
is verboten. You're not allowed to say these things, but he would say these things, and then they say, well, you think we're so clean, we're killers too, right? I
Yeah.
mean, this is the kind of thing that you are not allowed to say. There's this kind of gentleman's agreement that we both have to kind of BS each other and just pretend that we are not doing these things. And this folie à deux, folie à plusieurs, he just kind of crashed that completely. And this is what the ruling imperial class was afraid of, that he would
Yeah.
give away their secrets, that he would do this kind of unmasking. This is why they were so furious at him. But once again, coming back to this idea, what is he doing? What is his strategy? What is he going to do? As I said, his strategy or his policy looks to be neomercantilism. Neomercantilism is not going to work because the US corporations are already at the monopoly phase. You have a market, corporations compete, and eventually they become monopolies. Once you become a monopoly like Microsoft or Amazon or any of the other major monopolies, essentially what you get is you get gouging and you get enshittification, because they don't have to do anything. All they need to do is gouge you. And then they're not going to invest and build up industry the way Trump wants them to do, because building up industry and doing all that stuff is risky and hard. Why do that when you can simply twist somebody's arm for financial gains? What we
Right.
call rentier capitalism. You can simply financialize your strategy and gouge them for money. Why would we go to the hard work of building industry, building supply chains, marketing, selling stuff, when people don't even have money to buy things because we've screwed them so bad, right?
Right.
And so that strategy is not going to work. But what this strategy of tariff is, it gives, once again, Trump a pretext with which to cut corporate taxes and possibly, high earning income taxes, and say we're going to recoup it in tariffs. But you're not going to recoup it. You've simply passed those taxes onto individuals in the form of a sales tax, because it's the importer who pays that, who will pass those costs onto the consumer, and that will drive everybody's prices up, and essentially that will run into inflation. And of course, the financial class loves it, because it means that they don't have to take a haircut, and they will be able to continue. Interest rates will be kept steady, and they won't have to take any hit on their financialized earnings. So it works for the ruling class, but for the vast majority of working class people, vast majority of people, it will be pain. It will be even more pain. And what I like to compare it to is, it's like you go to a doctor, but the doctor is a quack. They don't know anything. They don't know
Right.
anything about medicine. And so, but they have to do something, and they're going to do something dramatic. So they say, oh, you have a headache? Let me cut off your arm, right? You have bad breath. Let's do some bloodletting. Okay, bring on the leeches. And give you some mercury to boot. This is kind of the situation that we're in. That we're in the situation where the pain and the suffering is real and obvious. 70% of the US population is living hand to mouth. Our life expectancy is decreasing. It's unthinkable that a developed state should have a decreasing life expectancy. But all of these, treatments are not going to help. In fact, they're just going to hurt us more. In fact, there's a good chance that they're going to kill the patient. So we have to be very, very careful about this. The other
It's gonna
thing
make it
is,
worse.
when Trump thinks in neo-mercantile terms, the other thing he doesn't understand is supply chains. I've said this before. Trump is a real estate magnate. And in real estate, there are almost no supply chains. Land has no supply chains, right?
Mhm.
You either have the land or you don't. If you build a building, it's going to have maybe 300 components, 300 supply chain. That's not a lot. If you look at your average car has 30,000 components. All of those components came from somewhere else. If you
Right.
look at your average, jetliner or, jet fighter, they have about 500,000 components. All of those came from somewhere else. And if you don't understand that imposing tariffs is going to radically affect, if not destroy your supply chains, you really have no concept of what you're doing. So once again, it's like, that doctor who wants to chop off your arm because you have an eye infection.
Yeah, I don't think he has an answer. I think he's stuck in this kind of box of the empire is declining. How do I get resources back into the country? Meaning, how do I reindustrialize the nation, especially and disincentivize all of these companies from going abroad and shipping their products back into the United States? So his thought is, okay, well, I can threaten sanctions with everybody. I can get the different, I can down the trade imbalance between US and other countries. And to your point, that's not going to work. I mean, if anything, you are increasing the cost for Americans. Like I saw on a thing where it was something to the effect of during Donald Trump's first term, he had put tariffs or sanctions on like $300 billion of goods. That number is up to $1.5 trillion right now. And we haven't even hit Europe, meaning he hasn't even gotten to the point of getting to Europe yet in regards to the sanctions or the tariffs that he wants to apply. We are already at 1.5 trillion. That money, that's going to affect us. Like that is higher prices that Americans are going to have to pay. And I would add something else. There is going to be a response from these other countries that are going to point out this is the reason why we need to de-dollarize. This is the reason why we need to get away from the US dollar, why we need to get away from this market. This is problematic. This can't be trusted as a political instrument or as an instrument of liquidity. Because at any particular random moment, the US president, any random US president, can decide to make all of these things weapons. Like that was part of the reason and the rationale for BRICS. And that rationale is only being solidified under Donald Trump's presidency. I just don't think he knows it out. And I agree with you. It's like, oh, you have a cold? Okay, let's amputate your leg. It's like, what? Trust me, it'll work. It's it's 5-dimensional physics. It'll work. It'll work. We just have to amputate your leg and everything will be okay. And it's like, dude, I don't think that works. I mean, you're effectively having a pissing contest with the entire globe. And yeah, it's just weird. It's super bizarre. How do you think this is going to turn out, by the way? And this can be the last question. Do you think he's going to have any success with this at all? Now, he's had minor success. So dealing with, let's say, Panama, for example, Panama has decided to cut ties with China. Colombia has decided to take, I guess, the Colombian refugees who were in the United States who stayed here too long. Same thing is true with, there was another state. I think Venezuela decided to take back its people. But these are like very small, minor countries. He's not dealing with peer competitors on this, or even economic competitors in this sense. How do you I mean, there is no way that the US has enough clout to do this to the entirety of the world. Or correct me if I'm wrong. Is there a way that he can pull us off with the entirety of the world in the crosshairs?
I think it's a miscalculation. He may think that he can do that. He may think that by dealing with countries one-on-one, he can do that. And remember, he was very focused on having these kind of one-on-one relations. But notice he's going only after small fish, right?
Right.
He's only bullying the weak, right? And this is something that, the bully sidekick needs to understand this. The bully sidekick, you get close to the bully because you think that will make you powerful. You don't understand that the bully can just as quickly turn on you because that is a dynamic of the strong, forcing the weak to do what they want, and the weak suffer what they must.
Right.
This is the dynamic. Remember, Trump has said, I mean, people say, is Trump going to start a war, not start a war, etc. I have always said that President Trump is not anti-war per se, but he is against losing wars. I mean, this is the John McCain thing, right? He says, I don't like people, who are losers in a war, right? My champions are not losers, right?
Yeah.
So this is his mindset. He wants to show that he's powerful. He wants these kind of easy wins against foreign powers. This is why he's, throwing his weight around against, Canada, which is, by all, by all measures, it's simply a vassal state. And now the Canadians are going to assert their sovereignty. It's not going to work. It's going to look really, really pathetic. Same thing for, Denmark and, these smaller European states. They're going to be kicked around, pushed around, tossed to the wall. Is the same thing going to happen with China and Russia? I don't think so, because, to the extent that, the bully is rational, they know that you don't pick on somebody who's bigger than you are or as big as you are. And so that's not going to work. But I think we have to step back and ask ourselves, what do we really mean by work, or what is the real meaning of success? And I think that in a strange sense, Hegel used this term, the cunning of reason, which is this history moves in these like strange, convoluted ways, but gets what it wants. I think ultimately this will be successful for the rest of the world, because Trump is going to alienate all his former quote unquote allies, force them into the multipolar world, accelerate that multipolar world, just as the Biden administration did. Everything they did to try and block the multipolar world accelerated it. Everything they did to try and cut China off at the knees actually strengthened China, made it more powerful. Now they're coming out with AI for everybody, undercutting the US tech business model, which they were relying on to boost their economy. So everything that they're doing is actually undermining themselves. And so I think over the long term, how will it turn out? I think it will accelerate multipolarity, which will eventually force the US to a more realistic position vis-a-vis the rest of the world. And we see the early signals or the early understandings of that in Marco Rubio's speech.
Yeah, I agree with you. That speech was astonishing to hear, especially coming out of a neocon like Marco Rubio. And it gets across how whacked out of his mind Antony Blinken was. I mean, like, when the State Department is the State Department for a reason. It's not the Department of War. It's the State Department. The entire point is negotiation going through the State Department. And it seems that Rubio is taking that job, regardless of his own political ideology, is taking that job far more serious than Blinken took that job. I mean, there's the level of arrogance that are associated with liberals in this country, and for that matter, even in Europe, that is breathtaking. There's this weird moralizing thing where they seem to think of themselves as better, even though there's nothing to show for them being better. It's very bizarre. They can't even win elections at this point. So, KJ Man, thank you for this, KJ Man. I always enjoy these conversations. I always learn something about this. We'll see whether this works. I agree with you on this. I don't think. What's the saying? If you alienate everybody, you have more enemies than friends. In which case, you will fail in whatever pursuit you're going after because you have too many enemies. You can't unbalance the situation to such a degree where you can't compensate in the way that you're trying to manage. And I guess what he's trying to do is bring back manufacturing. But threatening BRICS countries, threatening South Africa, threatening Canada, threatening Mexico, threatening the European Union. Like, at a certain point, you're like, okay, dude, you've effectively threatened the entire world. I don't know if it works like that. You can get away with this for one or two countries. And if you focus on a country, You can isolate them, kind of like prison rules. It's like when the thug wants to go after somebody in the prison, they bring the guy over to the bathroom by themselves, in which case they can do whatever they want to the guy. You can do that, but when you are doing this in the open where the rest of the world sees it, I think you give yourself a problem. I mean, I could be wrong. We can see how it unfolds in the first, few months.
I absolutely agree with you. I think Trump is mistaking global politics for an episode of The Apprentice.
Yes.
And he thinks that he can threaten and fire everybody. But what he forgets is The Apprentice is a scripted show with a producer and a director and everything behind the screens. He doesn't have that anymore. And so there's a fundamental, category error, a misunderstanding of the situation.
KJ No. KJ No is, oh, wow, there we are. KJ No is a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia-Pacific region. He's a contributor to the book Capitalism on a Ventilator, once censored by Amazon. It is available at iacenter.org. KJ, there's another location that you are, that you give your content. What is it? Breakthrough News, correct?
Yes, it's the China Report on the Breakthrough News Network.
China Report on the Breakthrough News Network. Definitely check him out. The man is fantastic. Thank you for this, my man. You have a good day, KJ.
Thank you. You too.